Hello, and welcome to another episode of Joe and Cat Chats. Today we are recording on February 2nd, 2021, and it is the second day of Black History Month, which we are going to have a theme all through the month, obviously, here at Joe and Cat Chats, of course, with all sorts of Black cultural, social, political moments that we're going to discuss. But today's episode, I wanted to start off with a note that is actually, it can be related, but not necessarily so. And that's with mental health. We've done an episode about mental health. We've done an episode about accountability partnerships. And so I just wanted to make a note because February tends to be a really difficult month for a lot of people. It's both seasonally and circumstantially, particularly those of us who it's winter for right now in the north side of the equator. It's tough because winter is dragging on. And in addition, we have a global pandemic that is ongoing and seemingly just getting worse and worse. I've been struggling myself with this, and so I just want to be open about that and say that I get it. And I just want to make sure that everyone knows that there are resources available in your area, so please seek them out. And just to say, I think I can speak for both of us when I say we see you. We hear you, we are here for you, and we're here with you. So if you need somebody to talk to, please reach out because we will reach back. So please take care of yourselves. Joe, how are you?
You know what? I'm as good as I can be given the circumstances.
Yeah.
Thank you for being candid and vulnerable and honest as always. And as customary, this is what we do here on the greatest podcast in the history of history, Joe and Cat Chats. As you so eloquently said, sister, we are going to get into a deep dive today. And as you can see on the ticker at the bottom of the screen here, episode 34, Women and the Civil Rights Movement, and today's date, February 2, 2021. There's loads of women we could talk about, but we have only an hour to do the conversation. So, yeah, and we're going to talk about important Black women in the civil rights movement and the struggle for humanity, freedom, equality, and survival. So that's what we're talking about today. How are you? Everything okay?
Yeah, I'm as good as I can be, given the circumstances. And I'm also really excited. We did have trouble, whittling down how many people we wanted to talk to or about today, because there's so many amazing women out there that were involved in the civil rights movement and beyond. Right. So I'm excited. I think we should get right into it. Who do you want to talk about first, Joe?
You know what? The first person we are going to talk about is a lady who was born in my home state of Maryland, a lady named Sojourner Truth. Sojourner Truth. Now, I didn't get a chance to share this because at the time when I visited her park on the eastern shore of Maryland in Dorchester County, my phone just somehow wasn't working. So I couldn't take pictures of myself and being at the site. Otherwise, I would have been taking pictures and you would have seen it on Instagram and it would have gotten a couple of hundred likes or whatever, but it is what it is. Now, she's an American abolitionist that was born into slavery in 1797, and she is a women's rights activist and a civil rights activist. Her real name is Isabella Baumfree. Isabella Baumfree. Now, Sojourner Truth was bought and sold 4 times, and she had 5 children. One of them died when the child was young. In 1827, she ran away with one of her children to another abolitionist family, the Van Wagoners.
Wow. Okay.
There's more. The Van Wagoner family bought Sojourner Truth's freedom for the grand sum of $20.
Wow.
I'm going to say that again. The Van Wagoners, a white abolitionist family, bought a human being's freedom for $20. Granted, that was $20 back in 1827, so the value of $20 from then until now is probably in the $10,000 range, maybe somewhere around there. I don't know the exact calculation, but think about that. People were buying human beings for $20 300 years ago.
Yeah.
Now, Sojourner Truth also sued a white family in Alabama because one of her sons, Peter, was illegally sold to a white family. She's the first Black person in human history to win a court case against a white family to get legal custody of her son. So think about what I just said. Her son was taken from her and sold to a white family illegally. Mm-hmm. Sojourner Truth had to sue the white guy who took her son to get her son back.
That's horrendous.
Sojourner Truth moved to New York City in 1828, and she became a preacher. Sojourner Truth, much like many of the enslaved Africans around that time, never learned to read, nor did she know how to write. However, she frequently toured with Frederick Douglass, another magnificent Black person, and we're going to be speaking about him in 3 weeks when we do Men and the Civil Rights Movement. He's going to be one of the prominent names we will discuss. She was also on tour with William Lloyd Garrison and Susan B. Anthony. Now, just to clarify, of the 5 children that she had, 3 were her own. 1 died. The other was the product of a rape by one of the slave owners. Okay. So, in the 1850s, Sojourner Truth moved to Battle Creek, Michigan, where 3 of her daughters lived. Now, when the Civil War started, Sojourner Truth helped enslaved Africans join the Union. She helped to free more enslaved Africans. She organized supplies for Black troops. She became involved with the Freedmen's Bureau. And the Freedmen's Bureau was essentially emancipated Africans that were no longer slaves. And she helped many of these Africans find jobs and were able to help them rebuild their lives. She tried to secure land grants for famously and formerly enslaved Africans. Now, she also is famous for giving a speech called Ain't I a Woman? And this Ain't I a Woman speech advocated for women's rights, civil rights, and human rights. Back in the times when women weren't allowed to vote, because women weren't allowed to vote until the 19th Amendment, if I'm not mistaken, which was 1920 in the United States. Yeah. So here you have a statuesque Black woman. She's my height, 6'1" tall. Never learned how to read nor how to write. Never had any sort of formal education, yet was more educated than many of the people who had a formal education. Mm. She stood up for truth. She stood up for truth because she changed her name to Sojourner Truth. Part of the reason why she said Sojourner, why she changed her name to Sojourner, is because much of her life was spent traveling. She was bought and sold by various plantation owners, and obviously these plantation owners were avaricious white men. So in the consistent and constant search for truth and fighting for freedom, she decided to embody those values with a new name, Sojourner Truth.
Wow. That's incredible. What an amazing person. And it's so funny because when you said that, she didn't have a formal education, I mean, some of the people I admire the most, which are Black women, didn't necessarily have educations in the traditional sense because that wasn't allowed for a long time. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a long history of that, and not being able to read and write is part of it. And it's, a way of perpetuating segregation and things.
Yeah. That's amazing. It's also a way to prevent the oppressed groups from organizing, because you can't read and you can't write. How are you going to be able to communicate with other people effectively? Now, later on, one of the people that we are going to discuss was Ms. Rosa Parks, and she had a major campaign with regards to the civil rights movement, most specifically the Montgomery bus boycott. And that involved flyers being passed out of the church, which obviously you have to be able to read to understand what is on the flyer. Another reason why Black people, enslaved Africans, were not allowed to read nor write, another book they were not allowed to have was the Bible.
Right.
You're not allowed to have a Bible. So for many Black people, you are in this hopeless situation where you were born into an enslaved environment, your children are born as slaves, and you die as slaves. And the one source of inspiration or hope you hope to have is a higher power, whatever that higher power is. And imagine being in a place where you have no hope, and the hope that you look to for some sort of inspiration, or in a greater sense, some sort of divine intervention, is taken away from you because the slave masters and overseers don't even want you to have hope.
Yeah.
That is the environment many of these women we are going to discuss lived in.
Right.
And not only lived in, but persevered and survived, and ultimately left a legacy of admirable service and a history of nonviolent direct action to change the course of lives for generations to come.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and education in whatever sense, and literacy, it begins with literacy. I mean, that's what expands someone's world. Being able to understand and know that there's more than just your immediate surroundings is powerful, and that's why it was suppressed for Black people for so long.
Absolutely. As my uncle, God rest his soul, told me years ago, he said, "Jojo, information changes situations."
Absolutely. Yeah.
There it is.
Totally. Well, I've got somebody that was also born into slavery during the Civil War that I wanted to talk to, or about, I should say.
Sure.
Her name is Ida B. Wells.
Yes.
We share the same last name. So I thought it was really kind of neat that I got to, do a bit of research and come up with sort of a biography of Ida B. Wells. So she was a Black American journalist.
Real quick, is she a distant relative at all? I'm assuming no, but I just want to clarify that.
I don't think so. I didn't look into that, but I really don't think so. Yeah.
Okay, just making sure.
Yeah. For sure. So American journalist and social reformer who led the anti-lynching crusade in the USA in the 1890s. Again, born into slavery during the Civil War, and became a school teacher at the age of 14 in Mississippi. So there's that education portion again. In 1884, Ida B. Wells was thrown off of a train despite having a ticket because she refused to give up her seat for one in the quote-unquote colored-only train car. And then in 1887, the Tennessee Supreme Court reversed the ruling that went against Wells when she sued the railroad company. So it took 3 years for her to get justice, or some form of justice. In 1891, Ida B. Wells became a journalist, writing critically about the education, or lack thereof, available to Black children. In 1892, 3 friends of hers had been lynched by a mob that led to an editorial campaign that she began against lynching. And then after her newspaper's office got ransacked, she continued publishing anti-lynching articles and became a lecturer and a movement organizer. So after moving to Chicago, she also became part of the suffrage movement, which is the movement for women's right to vote. And then, so from 1898 to 1902, she became Ida B. Wells Barnett because she got married, served as the secretary of the National Afro-American Council. In 1909, she was one of the founding members of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, which still exists today. But she later distanced herself from the organization because of the overwhelmingly white and elite Black leadership, which is an interesting point. And so a year later, in 1910, Wells Barnett founded and was president of the Negro Fellowship League, which aided new migrants from the South. And then in 1913, she founded what may have been the first Black women's suffrage group in the Chicago region, Chicago's Alpha Suffrage Club. So, a pretty amazing woman.
Yes. And there's going to be a future episode, and I don't know when, but you said something that just, I was just like, you know what? Yeah, we need to talk about this. You said that there were essentially too many white people and elite Black people in the organization. We're eventually going to have a conversation about quote unquote elite Black people. We've sort of done that with the colorism episode about a month or two ago.
Yeah. And I think we also touched on that when we went through Biden's cabinet and the inauguration.
We absolutely did. Yep. When we talked about obviously Kamala Harris and Lloyd Austin. The U.S. ambassador to the UN, Greenfield. We talked about her. She's Black. So we sort of alluded to that conversation, but I certainly think the elite Black class in the United States needs to be discussed, and I think you and I are certainly more qualified than most to have that discussion. So
fair enough. And I think that's another theme that's going to come up today a lot, because there are a couple of people that I want to highlight that are in political positions or were. And yeah, I mean, it's a thing that we need to continually address and criticize, because one thing that I want to make really clear, and I'll say it probably more than once in this episode, is that representation matters.
Yes.
Seeing Black folks in positions of power is powerful, but it doesn't go far enough.
I agree.
And so while we're highlighting some of these people because they were, prominent leaders in the civil rights movement or in whatever they did, that's amazing. And representation is totally important. But again, we were critical of that when we talked about Biden's cabinet, and we have to be critical of it now.
Absolutely. And I know this is something that I've said on several occasions. Just because you have a Black face in a high place, that does not necessarily mean that those Black faces in high places have Black people's best interest in mind and heart. Take, for instance, Barack Obama's administration. 2 Black attorney generals and a Black head of the Department of Homeland Security. What happened? Black people were still being shot dead in the street, and Black people still didn't get any sorts of justice.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So there is, and there was an increased military presence, especially with Black people. And this goes to my next point. The next person that we're going to discuss. This person was also born on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, Harriet Tubman. She was known as the Moses of her people. She was also known as the conductor of the Underground Railroad. Now, she didn't create the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad was created by a group of Black and white abolitionists. And this network, this Underground Railroad, was a network of safe houses and escape routes from the South to the North.
Yeah.
Now, I mentioned the military with reference to Barack Obama. Harriet Tubman served in the Civil War. She was a scout, she was a nurse, she was a soldier, and a spy for the U.S. Army. Harriet Tubman was also the first Black woman to serve in the United States military. Now, she was born in Dorchester County, Maryland, on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. This is actually visited the area where she lived this past July, but again, my cell phone, just the battery ran out, so I couldn't take any pictures. And there's a national park.
Jeez, sorry, the dog is.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
As he does.
It's all right. There's a national park on the Eastern Shore in a town called Church Creek, Maryland. And the national park is named the Harriet Tubman National Park. Church Creek, Maryland is about a 2-hour drive away from Baltimore. It's about a 45-minute drive away from Salisbury, Maryland, which is the biggest town on the eastern shore of Maryland. It's about an hour away from the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, which was formerly known as Maryland State University, which is a historically Black college and university located in Princess Anne, Maryland. And it's a really small school in a small town. I've actually been there. Harriet Tubman's real name is not Harriet Tubman. Her real name is Araminta Ross. Araminta Ross. She was one of 8 kids. When she was 5 years old, she became a domestic servant. And when she was 12, she got hit in the head by a slave master that was beating another enslaved man who tried to escape. As a result of being hit in the head with I think a 2 or 3 pound weight, she suffered from narcolepsy and strong headaches for the rest of her life.
Wow.
There's more. And now enslaved Africans were not allowed to marry in those times because couldn't have Black families getting married. So she joined in a marital union named John Tubman, a free Black man, in 1844. In 1849, Harriet Tubman and 2 of her brothers escaped. Her husband, John, stayed and didn't go with her. So John ended up marrying another woman. Harriet Tubman led 13 escapes and didn't lose a person, didn't lose a passenger, didn't lose anybody. Now, what I'm going to say next is I want everybody to really pay attention. Slave owners posted a $40,000 reward for the capture or death of Harriet Tubman. Now, this is $40,000 in 1851.
That's an incredible amount of money.
Catherine, if you put $40,000 for the arrest and capture of somebody now, people are on their phones and driving around like, yo, let me find this person. This was 40 grand in 1851. And I used a website called officialdata.org to figure out what that value of that money would be worth in 2021 dollars.
Yeah.
$40,000 in 1851 is worth $1,353,111.69 in 2021. So 170 years ago, a bunch of really rich white guys were like, look, we want Harriet Tubman dead or alive, and we're going to put up the equivalent of $1.3 million for her capture or her death. That is how bad they wanted Harriet Tubman dead.
Yeah.
Now, it gets deeper. She helped other anti-slavery efforts, especially with one of America's greatest white people, John Brown. John Brown, a noted white abolitionist. What I'm going to share with John Brown shows you the true racism in the United States. John Brown led a raid on a federal armory in Harpers Ferry, Virginia, which is now known as Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, and tried to start a slave rebellion and liberation effort. He was captured. He was found guilty on 5 counts of murder, initiating a slave insurrection, and treason in 1859. Now, the Emancipation Proclamation that was signed into law by President Abraham Lincoln did not become into law until January 1, 1863. The 13th Amendment was ratified on January 31, 1865. He was found for treason, 5 counts of murder, and leading a slave insurrection in 1859. To give you an idea of how truly racist the United States is, John Brown was the first person in United States history to be executed for treason. Why? Because he wanted to free Black people.
Right.
Think about that. John Brown was killed by the government because he wanted to free Black people. And he was the first person in United States history to be executed by for treason. Think about that.
That is, I mean, that's still sinking in. And it's making me think about the responsibility of white people today. We have talked about it for months. And I have a firm stance that the abolition of racism, and whatever that means, which includes for us, I mean, obviously systemic, institutional, and social racism.
Sure.
That's not Black people that have to get rid of it. It's white people. That's a white person problem. It's a white person problem that is impacting Black folks in their real world circumstances. And I could have a conversation with anyone about that and get into it. And we've been talking about this for, almost a year. so catch up on your Joe and Cat chats if this is the first time you're hearing that from us. But yeah, that's a fact that I didn't know, and I'm still just sort of, it's still just sinking in. My goodness.
Yeah. Harriet Tubman was an herbalist. She used natural herbs and herbal remedies to heal Black and white soldiers. She helped raise funds for the freedmen. She fought for women's suffrage. She died in 1913 and was buried with full military honors. Now, again, in one of the books that I've read recently, From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century, by Dr. William Sandy Darity and A. Kirsten Mullen, that book discusses the inequalities of Black soldiers when they left the military and the inequalities of their pensions. Basically meaning, Black people didn't get the same amount of money as white people, or in some cases, Black people didn't get anything for fighting for a country that once enslaved them. Harriet Tubman received an $8 a month pension for her service in the military and $20 for her husband's service. $20 a month. For years, she was denied receiving her military pension. Now, towards the end of her life, she ended up getting a bunch of that money in a lump sum. And towards the end of her life, she had brain surgery to alleviate her trauma. Now, according to various reports, she did not take anesthesia. And because she was a nurse in the Civil War, there's an old adage, when you have to do something that you don't want to do, that you know is going to be difficult, the old axiom is to say you bite the bullet. Years ago, in those times, anesthesia was not regularly used. So in the case, so if you needed to treat a gunshot wound or to have a limb amputated, Civil War soldiers would bite a bullet in order to reduce the amount of pain. Mm-hmm. She had brains, to give you an idea of how not only mentally tough she was to lead all of these expeditions and freedom marches to get slaves out of bondage. She had brain surgery and bit a bullet and had an operation on her head. And lived.
I can't even imagine that.
And lived to tell about it.
Wow.
So again, when you hear the latest conversation about putting Harriet Tubman on a $20 bill, and deservedly so, and again, I certainly think that Black people should have reparations in the forms of $20 bills, because that's what we need and deserve. But I'm all for Harriet Tubman being on a $20 bill. And again, in our previous episode that we did when we spoke about education, which was an early episode, this is the kind of history that needs to be discussed in our schools.
Yes.
And it should not be limited and relegated to the shortest month of the year.
Agreed. Yeah, I totally agree. That's, yeah. we absolutely need to reform and probably just scrap the whole thing and redo the education system in both of our countries, in Canada and the US.
When I speak about, hey, America needs a cultural autopsy, that cultural autopsy is not just limited to social clubs, swim team moms and country club dads that produce white supremacists and Karens. It also produces racist cops and teachers that don't teach the true history of these United States. And the true history of these United States is not to have Harriet Tubman as a focal point of conversation about as to be on a $20 bill. She is much more than being a face of a $20 bill.
Yeah.
Considerably more.
Absolutely.
There should be elementary schools named after that woman.
Yeah.
There should be a Harriet Tubman Boulevard in every city and every major city in the United States.
Yes. Yes.
And a Harriet Tubman Park.
Yeah, absolutely. That's mind-boggling how important of a human being she was and still is.
And still is. And Kat, and again, thanks to all the viewers that we have watching right now. Part of the reason why we're giving this to everybody is because we want to make sure that we provide people with the type of education and knowledge that you weren't necessarily receiving when you were 11 or 12 or 13 or 14 years old. You weren't getting that. You weren't getting it. So we're going to give it to you. And we want to make sure that the history that we're providing to you all doesn't end on March 1st and you forget about it on March 1st. Remember this stuff. Remember this stuff. Go back to it. Learn about it. If you want to start a petition in your city to say, hey, you know what? I want to dedicate this plot of land to Harriet Tubman because she's an important woman in American history. Go for it. Do it.
Absolutely.
I'm wondering why there aren't more cities in the United States named Tubmanville.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Or why why there aren't more counties in the United States named Tubman County.
Right. Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I mean that, she's clearly a difficult person to top as far as the influence and importance of her in history and all the way till today. But someone I wanted to bring up is Viola Desmond, because there's two connections here. So Viola Desmond was born in Nova Scotia, which was one of the landing spots for the Underground Railroad, which Harriet Tubman helped facilitate. And so she's also on a banknote in Canada. And so that's the other connection that we'll make, but I'll get to that in a second.
Yes.
So Viola Desmond was a Canadian businesswoman. She was a beautician and a civil rights activist. So in the early 20th century, beauty parlors, as many people know, became the center of social contact in the Black community, and shop owners were able to achieve authority and status within the community. And so she was she was a person that was well known and well renowned in her community. Yes. Now, she was in the town or city of New Glasgow, Nova Scotia one night, and she decided, this was on November 8th in 1946, she decided she wanted to go see a movie. So she went to the Roseland movie theater. She asked for a ticket to the main floor, but was given one to the balcony, which is typically where the quote unquote colored folks were allowed to sit. So after realizing that this was because of the color of her skin, and even though she had offered to pay the extra 1 cent it was to get a main floor ticket, she decided to sit on the main floor anyway. So the staff, and particularly the manager at the theater that night, took issue with this because she was a Black woman. And they caused basically a spectacle, and it caused the police to get called, and she was literally dragged out of the theater, injuring herself. Or sorry, the police injured her, I should be clear there. And they threw her in jail overnight, where she remained sitting upright with composure all night. So the next day, Desmond was convicted of, quote, attempting to defraud the provincial government, end quote, which was based on her alleged refusal to pay the seat price difference of 1 cent, even though she had offered. And she was not provided legal representation. So she was fined $26, 6 of which went to the manager who tried to kick her out. And he was listed in the court proceedings as prosecutor. Yeah. So, like, there are layers of just not okay. Like, everything here was not okay. Her story wasn't even told until a few years later, when another Black woman started a newspaper, and I didn't write down the name, but she started to, publish her story because she was not given, due process. So in April 15th, 2010. And she died in 1965. So in 2010, Desmond was granted a free pardon by Nova Scotia Lieutenant Governor Marianne Francis, accompanied by a public declaration and apology from the Premier of Nova Scotia at the time, Darrell Dexter. Canada Post also put her on a national stamp in circulation in 2010. And in 2018, Viola was selected to appear on the $10 bill in Canada, and she was the first non-royal woman to appear and the first Black woman to be depicted on Canadian currency. And luckily, I found one, and there she is. Hopefully everyone can see. And Canada's money is really cool. If you're not from here, it's like colored and fun.
Yes, yes, yes. When I was, and I know I shared this story, when I was living in Vancouver, a little more than a year ago, one of the things that I did is I found one of those Canadian $10 bills, and I kept one in my wallet, and I sent one to my daughter. I don't have my Canadian $10 bill anyway. I had to spend it, but I sent one to my daughter, and my daughter has a Canadian $10 bill in her bedroom, and she has it framed. And I explained to her the importance of that $10 bill, because it's important that, and I'll be truthful. I didn't know about Viola Desmond until I played a show in Winnipeg on August 20th, 2017. And
Okay.
I visited the Canadian Museum of Human Rights, which is in Winnipeg. And there was an entire exhibit in the museum about Viola Desmond. And I was like, I had never heard the name Viola Desmond before in my life. I didn't know who she was. And it's this sort of, when I talk about internationalizing the struggle, which fights for humanity, freedom, equality, and survival, the situations that take place in the United States with these extraordinary Black women that we're discussing, it's not just limited to the United States, because you have a situation like Viola Desmond, who was in Nova Scotia. And I also have a connection with Nova Scotia, not only because I've played a couple of shows there, but my godmother, Josephine Muxlow, is a Canadian Black woman who lives in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Oh,
She was my mother's roommate in nursing school 50 years ago, or something like that, 45 to 50 years, a long time ago, in the early 70s. So coming up on 50 years now. Yeah, she's my godmother. I haven't spoken to her in a long time. You just lose contact with people after a while. But yeah, so I have a connection with Halifax, and Halifax is a beautiful, beautiful city. Oh, wow.
yeah.
Canadian Maritimes, they're an hour ahead of me, so they're 4 hours ahead of you. So yeah, and for many people, she is known as the Canadian Rosa Parks.
Mm-hmm.
You've heard that from time to time because it makes sense to call her that. And obviously, since we're going to transition to the next person, the person I would like to speak about next is none other than Rosa Parks.
Before you transition, I just want to make a note, because Nova Scotia, I just want to encourage everyone to look at the history of that place, because geographically, it's really unique. And it was one of the main landing places of the Underground Railroad, which we just mentioned a few minutes ago. But look up the history of Africville and...
Let's say Africville, yep.
Yep. And most recently, the protests of the Mi'kmaq peoples in that region,
Yes.
And the history of slavery in that region. Because although we're highlighting things that are really awesome about Nova Scotia because it is a great place, there's some not so great things and really, really racist history that's really problematic that caused the circumstances that Viola Desmond was, a part of.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. So we're going to go from the Canadian version of Rosa Parks to the real Rosa Parks. Black woman born on February 4th, 1913. February 4th, 1913. So if she were still alive, she would be celebrating her 98th birthday in a couple of days as the date of this recording.
So Viola Desmond was born in 1914, so they are very similar.
There you go.
Very cool.
They're born a year apart.
A year apart.
Same day.
Yeah.
Same day. On December 1, 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama, Rosa Parks refused a bus driver's order. The name of the bus driver is a gentleman named James Blake. She refused an order to move to the back of the bus. She was not the first person to refuse a bus driver's orders and a sit-in. There are plenty of other situations where Black people in Montgomery, Alabama have refused bus driver's orders. Bayard Rustin in 1942 was one. Sarah Louise Keyes is another one. And the participants in the Browder versus Gale lawsuit in 1956. I think her name was, I forget Miss Browder's first name, but the gentleman, Gale is the mayor of Montgomery, Alabama at the time. So Rosa Parks was born Rosa Louise McCauley. She enrolled in college is at what is now known as Alabama State University. Parks withdrew from school because her mother got sick. Someone had to take care of her mother. And while she left school, she became a talented and well-known seamstress. Rosa Parks married a local barber named Raymond Parks. She got married at 19 years old. And Raymond and Rosa were involved in various social justice organizations in and around the Montgomery, Alabama area. And later on in life, Rosa Parks eventually became the secretary of the NAACP in Montgomery, Alabama. Now, in 1955, Parks had already been an established organizer and civil rights leader in Alabama, and she helped to organize the Montgomery bus boycott. Now, in her autobiography, she was asked about her motivations, and I'm going to read this quote directly so you get an idea of what her mindset was, I should say. It says, Parks said in her autobiography, "People always say that I didn't give up my seat because I was tired, but that isn't true. I was not tired physically or no more tired than I usually was at the end of a working day. I was not old, although some people had an image of me as being old then. I was 42 years old. No, the only tired I was tired of giving in." That should give you an idea of what kind of woman, what kind of human being Rosa Parks was.
Yeah.
Now, she led the Montgomery bus boycott. And in the year 1900, so 121 years ago, Montgomery, Alabama passed an ordinance to segregate bus passengers by race. Think about that. So, hey, if you're Black, you sit here. If you're white, you sit here. That's no different than in my hometown of Baltimore, Maryland in 1920 with redlining.
Mm-hmm.
You're Black, you live here. White folks, you live here. Now, on the bus, the first 4 rows of the bus were reserved for white people. Yet 75% of Montgomery, Alabama was Black people. Black people were only allowed to enter the bus from the back of the bus, but you had to pay up front. So you got on the front of the bus in the front, left the bus, and entered the bus from the back. Now, Black people were told to give up their seats for white people. If there were no more seats, Black people stood in the back of the bus. If there was no more room for the bus for white people, Black people were ordered off the bus and were told to wait for the next bus if the next bus was going to show up. If white people were at the front of the bus already and there was plenty of room in the back of the bus, nobody sitting in the back of the bus, Black people were ordered to pay for the bus, pay for your bus fare, get off the bus, and enter the bus from the back door. Now, in 1943, James Blake, that racist asshole of a bus driver, told Rosa Parks to get on the bus, leave the bus and enter from the back. It was a rainy day, and the bus drivers pulled away. Said, "Yep, leaving you here." And that was in 1943. The Montgomery bus boycott happened a dozen years later. Think about it, a dozen years later. Now, on December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks paid her bus fare, and there were 3 other Black people in addition to her on the bus. The bus driver, James Blake, ordered Parks and the 3 other passengers to move. Parks refused and moved from her aisle seat to a window seat. The other 3 Black passengers on the bus complied with the bus driver's order and moved to the back of the bus. Blake called the cops. The cops arrested Rosa Parks for violating segregation law. I'm going to say that again. the police were called and she got arrested for violating segregation law. There are laws on the books that segregated people. And she broke a law that said, hey, you are supposed to be segregated from other types of people. That should give you an idea of how racist racism in America in 1955 was. And 1955 is not nearly as long ago as you think it is.
No, it is not.
To put this in perspective, I was born on March 17th, 1976. 1955 is 21 years before my date of birth.
Yeah.
So there are people who are in their mid-60s who were born in 1955.
Yeah.
To put that in perspective, we're not talking 1855, 1955. These are people who are boomers who are looking to collect Social Security and retire soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
1955 is not that long ago.
It's not.
Rosa Parks was bailed out by Edgar Nixon, who was the president of the Montgomery NAACP, and a white gentleman named Clifford Dorr. Clifford Dorr was a white lawyer who defended activists in the New Deal and McCarthy eras. He also was the chairman of the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, under Harry Truman. He resigned because he didn't like a lot of what was going on under the Truman administration, and the FBI surveilled Clifford Dorr because he had left-wing contacts and because he supported Black people in their fight for freedom. The FBI surveilled a white guy because he was commiserating with Black people for their freedom. Think about that.
That's so messed.
Think about that. Think about that. On December 4th, 1955, the bus boycott was announced at every single Black church in Montgomery, Alabama. Black people walked, some of them used cabs. The boycott lasted exactly 381 days. The boycott ended on December 20, 1956, with the Browder versus Gale case. And that case was heard by the Supreme Court, not a local court in Montgomery or an Alabama state court or an appellate court or a court of appeals. The Supreme Court.
Wow.
So think about how racist Montgomery, Alabama had to be, where they won the case, and they won it again. Then they won it again. And these people, along with Clifford Dorr, had to appeal to the highest court in the land to make sure that Black people and white people were allowed to ride the bus together and not be segregated.
Upsetting, yet not surprising. And this is sort of making me think about the legacy of segregation now. I think a lot of people that I have spoken to, particularly in places like the town that I grew up in, which was very white. Mm-hmm. We did not have very many people of color in our town when I grew up. Yep. I mean, people don't have Black folks to talk to about this stuff.
Nope.
So, I mean, the legacy of segregation still exists today. Mm-hmm. And it happens for any thing, like, trans rights, for example. A lot of people don't understand or are fearful of trans folks because they don't know any trans folks.
Absolutely.
Because it's dangerous to come out sometimes. That's a whole other conversation.
There's a couple more things that I wanted to make sure I get in here with this, because I know we're the sand's filling up at the bottom of the hourglass. She moved to Hampton, Virginia, and got a job at Hampton University. And I know we might have mentioned Hampton University. Hampton University is near Fort Monroe, Virginia. And I know I've discussed Fort Monroe, Virginia. Fort Monroe, Virginia is the historic fort, which is the point on or about August 20th, 1619, when the first Africans from present-day Angola were trafficked by a bunch of Portuguese and Spanish ships to Fort Monroe, Virginia, which is actually known previously as Point Comfort, Virginia. Hampton, Virginia, which is now Hampton University, is right around that area. Now, she'd moved to Detroit, Michigan in the 60s and noticed segregated schools and segregated housing. She didn't have any kids. She had an younger brother that died. She outlived her brother. She outlived her husband. And she moved in with her mother in 1992 to take care of her in a nursing home. She then became active in civil rights and human rights until October 24th, 2005. Now, people understand who Rosa Parks is because some of us understood that because you talk about it in Black history. And the next episode that we're going to have after this one is about music. Now, a little more than 20 years ago, a couple of rappers from Atlanta, Georgia, Andre Benjamin and Antoine Patton, they went ahead and said, aha, hush that fuss. Everybody move to the back of the bus. Do you want to bump and slump with us? We're the type of people make the club get crunk. The name of that song is called Rosa Parks. It's off the Equimini album by a duo you all know as Outkast. So many people figured out, oh, Rosa Parks. Wait a minute. There's a whole lot of white people in suburbs across the United States and Canada and around the world like, who's Rosa Parks? I don't know. Oh, that's who Rosa Parks is.
Yeah.
And they didn't necessarily sing about her or rhyme about her, but they named the song Rosa Parks. And I clearly think that was in an attempt to make people aware of who Rosa Parks was and her legacy and how important she was, not only to Black history, but American history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's incredible. And oh my goodness, this time is just going by too quickly. I just want to maybe do some highlights, short highlights of the next couple of people that I wanted to bring to this conversation. The first is Shirley Chisholm, who was the first Black woman in Congress in 1968.
Yes.
Also the first Black woman to seek nomination for president of the United States from one of the two major political parties. She sought that from the Democratic Party in 1972. She was actually blocked from participating in televised primary debates. So when we're talking about segregation, I mean, they didn't want a Black woman in the debates on television. And so she fought this and then was granted or allowed to make one speech. And she won 152 delegates before withdrawing from that race. So Shirley Chisholm was an outspoken advocate for women and minorities during her 7 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives. Originally a nursery school teacher, joined the League of Women Voters, the National Association for Advancement of Colored People, which is the NAACP, the Urban League, Democratic Party Club, and she co-founded the National Women's Political Caucus in 1971. And as a congresswoman, Shirley introduced more than 50 pieces of legislation. She championed racial and gender equality, the plight of the poor, ending the Vietnam War. And I found a quote as well, actually, for her that said, quote, "I want to be remembered as a woman who dared to be a catalyst of change," end quote. I know. I wish we had more time because we have more people to talk about. But
so many more people to talk about. We have about 7 minutes left. But yeah, Shirley Chisholm is an incredibly important woman, especially when you think about now with Kamala Harris being the vice president of the United States. There's obviously a direct lineage to her and Shirley Chisholm. And you think about the squad, Ayanna Pressley, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Barbara Lee. And let's not forget some of the Black men that are members of Congress and the Senate. Tim Scott, who's a Republican, but he's still Black. Cory Booker, Barack Obama. Okay, so Shirley Chisholm is important.
Absolutely.
She is important. And that woman mattered.
Oh, yeah.
In a big way.
Yeah.
And again, she's another one of these people that should have elementary and middle schools named after her.
Yep.
You know what? I'm sending my kids to Chisholm Elementary.
Yeah. Amazing.
That's where I'm going. Chisholm Elementary. We have about 6 minutes left. Do you want to do another one?
I mean, yeah, I can't go without mentioning Maya Angelou.
Please, yes.
Yeah. I mean, we all should know who this is, but of course, she's an American poet, a memoirist, an actress who explored economic, racial, and sexual oppression. Her traumatic childhood experiences left her mute for several years. Her early life became the focus of her well-known and critically acclaimed first biographical work, which is called I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings.
Absolutely.
Came out in 1969. And then there was a movie that came out 10 years after that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she had an incredible life. I guess I'm not going to go into any details, but she became one of the first Black American women to have a screenplay produced as a feature film. And she became, in 1981, Maya Angelou became a professor of American Studies at none other than a familiar place.
Wake Forest University.
University, exactly.
Yes,
Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There is a health equity center that is part of the Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center in downtown Winston-Salem, North Carolina. The name of that health equity center is the Maya Angelou Center for Health Equity. They named it after her.
Wow. Yeah, and in 2011, she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is there anybody else you want to mention quickly?
Yeah, quickly, and I'll try to do this in about 2 minutes. Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie Lou Hamer, another incredibly important woman. She was born on October 6, 1917 in Mississippi. She's the 20th child of sharecroppers. She started picking cotton at age 6. She left school at age 12. And she married a gentleman named Penny Hamer in 1944. And she worked on a plantation until 1962. Now, in 1961, she had a uterine tumor and received a hysterectomy by a white doctor without her consent. What does that sound like? That certainly sounds like medical apartheid, and that's something we have discussed on our chat series in a previous episode.
Not only have we discussed that, but it is an ongoing issue for women, particularly Black and BIPOC women in prisons today. Today, it's still happening. So
still happening.
Look into it.
Still happening. Now, this forced sterilization was designed to reduce the Black population in Mississippi. It was also known as a Mississippi appendectomy. Hamer was able to adopt two little baby girls. She was about voting rights. She was about voting rights. She was about helping people to vote across in the South. She helped people to register to vote. She founded the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Fannie Lou Hamer was an important woman when we talk about politics, when we transitioned from Shirley Chisholm to Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie Lou Hamer was, she was worked as a sharecropper for many, many years. She helped founded the National Women's Political Caucus. She then went ahead and shifted her focus from politics to economics, which is important when we talk about reparations. And I've always said that racism is a function of economics. She started a pig bank. And this pig bank was to provide free pigs for Black farmers to breed, raise, and slaughter. In 1969, she started the Freedom Farm Cooperative. And the Freedom Farm Cooperative bought land that Black farmers could own collectively.
Oh, wow.
Yes, it was essentially a farming co-op. She received cash donations. One of the large cash donations was from Harry Belafonte. He will be discussed in next week's episode. And she bought 640 acres. 640 acres is equivalent to a square mile. Now, on this plot of land, she built a co-op store, a sewing shop, and a boutique.
Amazing.
And she also built 200 low-income properties on that land. So wow. Fannie Lou Hamer not only understood that humanity, freedom, equality, and survival comes from, and I talked about this, where you need two keys to unlock that door. You need a key that discusses politics. You also need a key that discusses economics. And both keys have to work in concert. Fannie Lou Hamer understood that because she understood that in order for Black people to exercise their 15th, 19th, 23rd, and 26th Amendment rights and to have some exercising of their political freedoms and ideologies, you also needed policies, economic policies to support what you believe in and what you stand for.
Absolutely. And I think that that's an interesting thing that we try to talk about all the time as well. We cannot divorce those two things from each other, but they are two parts that can be, blocked for people. So I have a whole list of honorable mentions that I'm going to put in the show notes for everyone to please, please, please look into, because these are incredible women.
Absolutely.
And they were part of the civil rights movement and are just so important still to to this day.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's countless others I'm sure that we missed too. So if you want to contact us, please do. We're happy to talk about any of this anytime.
Absolutely.
Joe, thank you so much.
You're very
what
welcome.
a great episode.
A fabulous episode. We'll be back next week. Black people and music. Stay tuned. Episode 35.
Yay.
Peace.